Okay. Welcome, ladies and jelly beans, to another episode of Ain't Got Time for That, where the topic of this podcast changes every week, but generally it's about talking about the things we don't make enough time for in our busy professional and personal lives for, and we try to unpick it and say, maybe you can make time, or maybe you should make time, or here's how we've made time. I'm Zeke Condon. I'm a product manager and a product entrepreneur and product coach. And with me, I have
Ilan, delivery lead, program manager, and life learner.
Ooh, love it. So today we want to talk about a topic that is close to my heart. It's one of my favorite things to do in the world, and that is recovering from a colossal failure. So what is a colossal failure? We could go through the definition from the internets, from the interwebs, maybe from the dictionary of some description, and say a colossal failure is when things just go to shit, really, right? I've got plenty of experiences in this, but I'm really keen to talk to Ilan and see if he's got any experiences with a colossal failure, and see if we can unpick him first. Ilan, put you on the spot, mate. You didn't expect that at all, did you? So
no, I mean, given I'd set you up to answer it first, well played.
Yeah, come on, mate. I want to hear. I think you're, in my eyes, you're a man of platinum coating, and I've known you for quite a while now, and I feel like you haven't had a colossal failure, but that's, I believe, because you wear it so well, but it might not be that it's so well. So tell me about your colossal failures and how you recovered from those.
I think the framing is important, and I think that so often one has the opportunity to course correct throughout an event, throughout a process, and kind of just across the board. So for something to really blow up, I think it takes quite a lot. I would say in recent years, I haven't necessarily seen something where it's been a total disaster. Maybe earlier on in my career and earlier on in life, there were definitely events that I didn't necessarily have the self-awareness to see things were falling apart. And when that happens, you tend to add gas to the fire. And a lot of that's just around language, communication, and when you start looking at it and developing skills to actually have a conversation and be transparent with those involved, you can generally find a way to mitigate and to manage events so that they don't really come to a blow.
There's not. You're right. Like, I don't think there is. I don't see many colossal failures within my network these days, because it's kind of, there's a lot around mindfulness and communication that we're all drilled into us, that you can course correct, and maybe it's a failure, but it's not a colossal failure, right? How is that? What are some of the things that you've kind of said that have changed that specifically for you? Like, is there any colossal failure that made you learn back in younger life of Ilan?
Oh, absolutely. I think in a whether it happened personally to me or if it was in my environment, you often see politics at play in organizations, and generally speaking, that's not necessarily an area that I like to be too heavily involved in. But I think that when people start playing politics, it has the potential to blow up quite badly when situations are misread. I think we've got a couple of examples that can be spoken to at another point in time. And what I've learned from that is emotion plays a major role in that. And specifically in a professional sense, it's important to try and keep the emotion out of the equation, and look more at facts and data to support decision making. And in doing that, it changes the conversation, it changes the narrative, and it makes it less subjective, and a lot easier to bring people on a journey. And then when things start looking like they're not necessarily going to be successful, you've got those people on the journey with you, you've got the data you can look at, and you can course correct together. However, when decisions are made by one person based on subjective metrics, or no metrics at all, and it's more on a hunch, it doesn't necessarily always lend to that conversation. And I think that's, so to your point around the dynamics changing, and I think that's a lot in part to the fact that a lot of organizations are way more data driven at the moment.
Yep. So, and the emotional part is kind of true. I can really relate with that, right? Is that when you do, if it's not necessarily our colossal failures, it's someone else's colossal failures, it's the ones that you do see, there is a certain element of emotion that has been taken into decision making that has led to that, and it's very much around not being aware of your bias. I found are the sorts of things that lead up to a colossal failure. So I think, like, I'm trying to think of like recent ones that I've seen. I don't see many that are where you've got people that are of clean thinking and able to talk through and talk about stuff, but it's more about the ones that don't talk about it, that they're about like their problems in their life or their problems in their work, and aren't articulating and aren't showing emotion in a clean and healthy way, that they then all of a sudden can fall off the radar, and you find out 6 months later that they've had a relationship fall apart, or they've had a falling out with their management, or their business has gone under because of some poor decision back earlier on. So I would say, like, to add to your emotion thing, I think there's a flip side to it as well, is that not allowing emotions to build up underneath you. And it's not to ignore emotions, it's to express them in a way that articulating to other people around you, letting them know what you're thinking, how you're thinking, and following up and making sure that they understood it, so that you might not need to be as emotional as you call it, but you are still expressing emotion through your communication, right?
And it's actually quite timely, because I was listening to a podcast and also audiobook over the weekend, Adam Grant's Think Again, and it speaks very much to learning, unlearning, thinking, rethinking, checking assumptions. And I think because that school of thought has gathered a bit more popularity of late, people don't necessarily feel that it's an issue to be wrong, or for something to need to pivot before you find success. And I think almost the framing of the question, talking about a colossal failure, is potentially even a bit of a dated one.
Yep.
You see it very often, like organizations now that are spinning up as startups, and they're moving to more mature stages. They've probably pivoted it 3, 4, 5 times before they reach that kind of unicorn status. And it's not as a result of a failure, but it's a result of an evolution. But in the past, you might have said, okay, well, if an organization doesn't make it, well, then it's a failure.
So the recovery from a colossal failure, coming back to what we want to talk about, right, is it's learning. And there, I'm going to go out there on a limb and say that culturally, I feel like even in my adult lifetime, that the people of our age group and younger have changed in terms of their ability to learn faster, and that has, led to colossal failures not being a thing anymore, because people are more accepting of failure as a learning opportunity personally for themselves, and B, when you see somebody who fails at something, they're more open and have taken you on the journey that you can say, hey, they tried, and you don't see it as a colossal failure. So the interpretation and the mindset around failure has changed, right? So it is a dated thing. And I still see, though, there are pockets of individuals within different mindset that whether it's cultural, because there are certain cultural elements of it. I've got friends from different cultural backgrounds that are still quite closed and guarded with what they're doing personally or what they're doing professionally, and they believe that it is better to not share in case of embarrassment and of saving face. And I wouldn't even honestly know if those people went through a colossal failure, because I don't know enough about how they operate or what they do. There might be something within that group, that subset of people, that they maybe still need to understand how to recover from this colossal failure. My question off the back of that is, do you think that learning and taking a more kind of learning first approach to learning from your failures and being ready to fail, do you think that's the principle to apply as a way to avoid failure?
I don't know if it's necessarily the principle to apply. I think it's more of a case of using some of the context around you to build that awareness for yourself.
I mean, I think that's what I mean, though. By applying that awareness of failure is everywhere, and to be successful, you need to have pictured and accepted what unsuccessful means. And it sounds contradictory, right? But by delving into the world of, hey, things could go wrong, and this is possibly what's going to happen, and these are the scenarios that might happen, and it's front of mind, means you can take more risks because you've kind of thought through the scenarios, right? And that is the recovering from a colossal failure is, well, basically, how do you turn this into a great big learning experience?
And I think the kind of evolution of the digital era has helped with that a lot, because a lot of people are growing up around that. So it's not even necessarily something that needs to be consciously built. Every article you read or something like that talks to it and helps, I guess, build a little bit of normality around it.
So what's the next? So what's the next step after this, right? If we say that the world is changing in the positive to essentially mitigate risks, batch things down, make them smaller, and I think, as you said, the digital world is enabling that. And let's assume that the non-digital world, where colossal failures may still work, that some of the principles that have been applied to batching things up, communicating better, communicating goals, needs, learning from mistakes, let's assume all of that comes across personal networks, personal culture, and business culture. What's the next step after that? Like, where does failure start to surface itself? I like one of the things that I'm thinking around is, where personal branding and let's look at the influencer space, right? So influencers build themselves on a personal brand, and they live their personal brand. And a lot of this personal brand is around just being open and honest with who they are and what they do and how they do it. But then, is that the next place where people are going to start to crumble? As if the world around the influencer changes so fundamentally that the influencer, either in the personal world or the business world, doesn't keep track of how the world around them is changing because they're being the influencer and they're not being influenced. Is that where people can fall into the trap of future colossal failures? It's a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer that.
No, and I think like anything, the more different information gets brought out into a normalized environment, the more people need to adapt the way that they approach things. So you probably would have said the same 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And to your point around the influencers, yeah, absolutely. I'm sure that there will be things that need to be considered that aren't being considered at the moment. But this is where that self-awareness comes in, and looking at it and going, okay, well, this is an image that I'm portraying, and this is the narrative that I'm portraying. But underneath it all, there actually needs to be a strategy as well. And I think you tend to see that in the influencer space as well, is they've built a narrative around who they want to be and how they want to shape the story, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's them end to end. And I think like anything, those that are successful continue to do that.
So I look at flipping this into the business world, and I see a lot of leaders that back maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I sort of started into the corporate world, I saw the style of leadership where you kind of climbed the ladder, you got to a certain standing in management terms, and then you grew on your leadership ability, right? And that leadership ability essentially became who you are and how you operate, which meant, underlying a lot of that leadership is around doing less but being more effective by influencing people. It's the same sort of influencing tools. Now, I see that as the next space for, ripe for potential colossal failures at a human level, where those individuals have disconnected themselves so much from the doing and have stayed above the doing and more in the influencing, that they become out of touch with the doing. And what happens if the doing shifts overnight, so much so that their level of influence changes and they fall apart? How does one prepare themselves to avoid that kind of future colossal failure? Like, apart from being like you and I, that are just obsessed with new information and constantly me playing with new toys, constantly understanding technology, sciences, everything from STEM. If you're not like that, how are they going to avoid failure, and how are they going to recover from it? Because to me, I see that this is a possible kind of personal leadership and business leadership epidemic that is, it's sitting on the horizon. The world is moving a lot faster. How they learnt has changed entirely, and leaders out there, they could be, it's not necessarily happening now, but how are they going to, how do you do it? Like, how do you even start to answer that question? No idea.
And I think a lot of the onus is going to be on them, but I think that it's obviously things that we've spoken to before around the education side, the curiosity side, and yeah, you will see some failures and you will see some success stories, and I think a lot of it's going to come down to what we touched on earlier around the individual and their ability to navigate the situation. Some of it they would have built resilience through getting to where they are, building the organization, seeing failures throughout their cycle and having to course correct. And that potentially will give them enough of a base that when things shift and change, they'll be able to navigate. And then there will be others that will build that skill set as they go. And then there'll be others that it may not necessarily make sense for them. Do we have a one-stop shop that can educate and can support? No. I think that you're seeing spin-ups in the education space that help with some of the skills.
But also the coaching, like the emergence of the coaching kind of in the marketplace across a whole broad range of personal through to business enterprise, that in itself is probably in response to this, emerging trend around disconnection between actual doing and leadership is a lot of that's coming from that, I would say as well. It's a very good observation. I would say one thing that's, not even realizing it, but ensuring for the future is around getting to know, and again, coming back to some of the other things I said before, is like mentoring and being mentored, mentoring others that are from a different demographic, from a different age group, from a different cultural background, because the melting pot of where the world is going, right, is that there's so much change and there's so many scenarios you can play out. You can't be insured for everything by personally knowing everything, but by getting your feet into as many camps as you possibly can, having an open mind and really trying to learn and be ready to learn, and the step after that is about being connected to the people that you can learn from and give information to. So that, not even realizing it, I think one of the insurances I put in place is trying to connect with and mentor and be mentored by people that are just out in totally different realms of the world to what I am interested in. I connect with interesting people and ask them to mentor me about something that I don't even necessarily think is relevant right now. But when I connect with somebody, I say, hey, can we keep in touch? I think that's a good thing to put in place.
I think that's part of it. And also just letting them talk and tell their story. Because sometimes you don't even know what questions to ask or what to frame up for the future. But letting them talk, it then gives you that repository of information that you can pull on later. So to your point around, okay, well, let's revisit that relationship. Them talking about their environment, talking about their context, it may not all fit into place in the moment, but you've got that you can leverage later. So I think maybe kind of to wrap things up, we've got a couple of minutes. Two points from your side, two things to focus on. What can the listener take away?
Yeah, I think to get out of a colossal failure, I think that a failure is in your own mind's eye, which we kind of established with, we might be failing the same as what we were before, but what we're actually doing is we're changing the way that we react to the data that's coming into us and turning it into something else. So failure, colossal failure in particular, is a mindset. So changing that mindset. If you're in the state of colossal failure, think about mindset, dig into mindset, understand the concepts and what that means, and understand that there is action and response is the simplistic way of dealing with information coming in and situations. But there's actually 3 steps in that, and that is information, processing, and response. And that is processing, that's where mindset sits, right? So your operating system for how you respond to the data and the things that are coming in. If you feel like you're in a space of colossal failure, it's not necessarily that you change the situation, it's you change your thinking. And that's
someone you trust. Find someone that you can bounce the ideas off. Spend a bit more time in that stage before you react.
Yeah. Learn. It's almost like learn as a form of reaction, and learn from external stimuli. The whole concept of take time out, go talk to someone different, go and work on, hear someone else's problems, hear them out. They're the kind of steps to change your mindset, to work out, that there are totally different thinking patterns. And if anyone does feel like they're in a space of colossal failure, please, there are great lines out there to speak to. Beyond Blue is a fantastic line. Have spoken to them personally when I had like really big problems. My colossal failure back when I was like 18, 19, I got set up on a pretty good gig and I was getting paid quite well to work on a long weekend. And I went and blabbed to some of the permanent staff there. Oh, isn't it great that we're getting time and a half? And then they all went on strike because nobody else was getting time and a half. Everyone else is just getting paid flat rates. So I got asked to leave that organization. And at that point, I had nowhere to go. This is when I first discovered these lines and talking to someone and having them hear you out. Please don't just rely on us. If you've clicked onto this because you've looked at colossal failure and that's the line you're listening to, seek help. There's no shame in it. It's great. And they're great for hearing you out. And like you said, go and hear someone else out. Listen to them. Hear their problems. It just gives you a new perspective.
Good call out. Awesome.
Book for the day. What was you mentioned a book. I think it was actually a podcast.
No, it's a book. It's by Adam Grant and it's called Think Again.
Think Again. Love it.
Yeah, one of his new books, I think published maybe early this year. Definitely worth a read.
I'm going to have to jump on that one. I've still got one from last week to catch up with. Next week, I would like to, or 1 week very soon from now, is talk about that, switch the flip to this, right? Which is the learning mindset. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what is a learning mindset and let's talk about nurturing it. And then maybe talk about like the different phases within your life around how a learning mindset can be something you can come back to and change and think. We've sort of started to touch on it, but like, I'd really love to dig into that with you. Maybe we can find a book or a couple of books to start on before we go into that one, because it's a big topic. It's a beautiful one as well.
Awesome.
Cool. So thank you everybody for listening, watching, hearing us out, reading as well now. If you would like to hear more about some of the coaching concepts, things that you don't have time for, hit up the rest of the podcasts. If you'd like some advice from either Ilan or myself, please get in contact. We are always open and ready to hear anyone out with their personal business problems. Same as you, hearing other people's problems helps us. We can help you. It's great to hear and talk to people. So reach out. Thanks. And until next week, stay safe. Take it easy.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Cheers.